Welcome to Commander Central, episode 274. And today we'll be taking a look at all the legendary creatures from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
Max, how's it going today?
Pretty good, Dana. You know, it's Friday. It's us two again. Chris has entered Wisconsin. He is home, I believe. But from what I can tell on social media posts, they got home at like 4 a.m.
Oh, okay, all right. So we should have him back next week in the fold, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Understandable. Needs to sleep after a family vacation. I get it.
And I would not be surprised if he's working some pre-releases this weekend.
Yes, I would guess as well. I'm going to stop in. I had the shop pull a couple cards from me, and I might get a pre-release kit. I don't think I'm actually going to play in the pre-release. I just have too many other things going on this weekend, but I think I'm going to try to get at least a few cards and see what I can crack. So
Nice.
How about yourself? Any plans to actually try it out?
No, I might try to go grab a pack, like a pre-release pack, but I don't know what I'm really doing this weekend yet.
Yeah, Midsummer's always like it's way easier in winter to go to these things when you're like, oh, it's the sun goes down at 3:30 and it's cold and I got nothing else going on a Saturday. But in the summer, there's always stuff happening.
Yeah.
So I don't think we had a chance to talk about this before it came up. Did we discuss the Hull Breacher ban that came through last week at all?
No, that was early this week, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Because we're recording on Friday, that would have happened on Monday when the show would have aired. Not that we need to spend a lot of time on it, because I don't know what we have to add that hasn't been said already. But I don't know if I've actually talked to you about it. What are your thoughts on losing that from Commander?
I'm impartial. Like, I understand why it was banned. I totally get it. Maybe I'm just lucky. I never had bad experiences running into Hull Breachers. Like, you know, I would think I've seen it a dozen times since Commander Legends came out, and I either had an answer or was able to find an answer, or someone was able to find an answer relatively quickly, so it wasn't that stereotypical Hull Breacher wheel into wheel into
Sure,
wheel.
right.
But I understand that is kind of the play pattern of how that card works, that you lock the game down. So I definitely agree with the banning, but personally speaking, I never had that bad of an experience running into Hull Breachers.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. It didn't necessarily affect me that seriously, but it's also one of those things, like you said, it's not surprising either. It's the kind of card that, regardless of what their intent was with its design, and I think the intent was to, like you said, to deal with people drawing excessively, it's also a card from a limited draft environment where there was a whole bunch of Monarch stuff. If you remember back to when Leovold was printed also from a Monarch set, so I'm guessing they wanted some way in those sets to kind of counter the Monarch a little bit in limited. But the impact outside of that environment was pretty substantial. And the card very much did encourage you to do wheel stuff and use it offensively versus using it defensively. And even if people we ran into didn't do it, it's a thing that really did happen out there quite a bit and led to, game states that the rules committee didn't really want. And I get it as well. Like it's consistent with how they approach the game and how they approach their bannings, and I wasn't remotely shocked to see it get hit.
Yeah.
So, okay, we can move on from that because we have nothing terribly exciting to say beyond that. Any fun games get played by you this week, Max, or any brewing occur?
No games, no real brewing. I've started looking at Adventures from the Forgotten Realms for like cards I need to add to my deck, so I'm skipping a set and jumping right to this one to try to get some cards, figure out for what decks I want, and looking at the legends like we're going to do today, and there's some that are intriguing me, but I don't know how well they would do leading their own deck.
Sure. I played a couple games this week, nothing terribly exciting. And I put together a new deck that I got to test a little bit on Wednesday night on stream. I built an equipment deck. I've wanted to do that for a while, and I've taken a few different shots at it over the years and never been happy with it. So I tried one more time and built an Azorius equipment deck that played pretty well. I was pretty happy with it.
Very nice.
The problem I always have with equipment, or have had when I've tried it in the past, is you start off with the deck playing pretty well, and then once that first board wipe hits, then the cost of re-equipping any equipment that's worth equipping, for the most part, like anything that's good, you spend 2 turns re-equipping stuff, and if somebody removes the creature that you have equipped or board wipes again, like it just becomes really easy to never be able to kind of rebuild. So I chose the two commanders I chose for two reasons. Number one, Arden lets you kind of get around that rebuilding process, and Esior, the owl that has, it's not truly ward, but it costs, spells that target your commanders cost more, both protects itself and protects Arden, and has evasion, so I can put equipment on it, be able to get through easier. I don't need to worry about running, things like Swiftfoot boots, both for protection and to give stuff haste, because Esior comes down on turn 2 and is, turn 4 mana to recast, 6 mana to recast. It's easy to get it back out. The combination seemed to fix a lot of the problems that I've always had in the past with equipment decks. And I wasn't building Boros equipment, I wanted to do something different as well. So it just checked a lot of boxes. And at least the first couple games I've played, I've been pretty happy with it so far. It's a good enough deck that it doesn't feel like I'm crippled playing it, but it's, also feels relatively fair as well. So I'm looking forward to spending a few weeks tweaking that and seeing if I want to keep it around.
Awesome. I look forward to playing against it.
So if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us and talk about any cool games you played or any new decks you've brewed, or just share your thoughts on Hullbreacher being removed from the format, how would you do that, Max?
You can reach out to us on Twitter at CMDR Central, search us on Facebook CMDR Central, check us out on YouTube CMDR Central, and pretty much Google CMDR Central and you will find us.
You can also find us on patreon.com/Commander Central.
Head over to Patreon and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play show, or just joining our community to chat with us and play some virtual EDH with everybody.
And we just got, we're recording this on Friday, it'll air on Monday. We just got a new cool piece of art we're going to put on some shirts and maybe some playmats, we'll see. So we should have an announcement of that coming out in the next probably 2 weeks or so with what those look like and where you can get them.
Yeah.
Okay, Max, since we have, I counted 172 different legends to talk about here. Is that right?
Close.
There's 30.
There's 30.
There's 30, so we might as well get into this.
We're not doing the pre-con decks, correct?
We're not. We're just doing the ones from the primary set. But there's 30 of them, right?
Yeah, 30 legendary creatures.
So I think we're gonna hit all of them, even if we only talk for a minute about a couple of them, because a couple of them there's just not a ton to say. So we'll just go through them alphabetically here, and why don't you start us out, Max?
Okay. The first one is Acererak, the Archlich. For 2 and a black, it's a legendary creature zombie wizard. It's a 5/5, and it says, when it enters the battlefield, if you haven't completed Tomb of the Annihilation, return Acererak to its owner's hand and venture into the dungeon. This is, a commander built around that dungeon mechanic. And then it also says, whenever Acererak attacks, for each opponent, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token unless that player sacrifices a creature.
So very much a commander where you need to do things with the dungeon mechanic. If I remember correctly from listening to a few podcasts, Tomb of Annihilation is like a D&D module you could play back in the day. Acererak is the main bad guy from it, so that's what the flavor combination there is. I think this has something that you can go infinite where you can just keep playing that same dungeon and playing Acererak over and over again. But I don't know if outside of doing that, I guess, making zombies is useful. And, even if you're not doing dungeon stuff with it, making multiple zombies whenever it attacks, it's a 5/5 for that mana cost is pretty decent. It's narrow but strong is kind of what I feel like. If you're doing the things it demands you do, it's pretty decent, but you kind of have to be doing them, or I'm not sure how you can't make it stick unless you're doing things with that actual dungeon.
Yeah, I wish this didn't have the dungeon part on it. I wish this was a 5/5 for 4 that had that ability, that second ability, because I think that making the zombie, if they don't sacrifice a creature, is a very fair mechanic. You're not locking the board down like you would with a Tegrid or something. Yeah, this plays into the Grave Pacts and Dictate Ereboses, but I still think, I'm not making you sacrifice the creature. It's up to you. But if you don't, I get a body. I like that type of political play. Yeah. Jumping through the hoops of going through that dungeon, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to cast Acererak 5 times just to get that completion.
Yeah, if you don't have any other way to proc that, yeah.
Yeah, but at least it goes back to your hand, so you're not paying the commander tax. So There is some upside, I think, and actually out of the mono-black commanders, I think this is my favorite one.
Okay. Well, up next we have Asmodeus the Archfiend for 4 black. It's a devil god and a 6/6. It has an ability called Binding Contract. If you would draw a card, exile the top card of your library face down instead. You can also spend triple black and draw 7 cards. and spend a single black to return all cards exiled with Asmodeus, the Archfiend, to their owner's hand, and you lose that much life. So this is kind of basically like a fixed Griselbrand. I would guess. You can spend trip black to draw 7 cards. You're going to take a good amount of damage in the process. I feel like this is probably the kind of thing that goes in another mono black deck that's kind of doing degenerate stuff versus maybe being your commander. Because it's primarily just a draw engine in the command zone, which is useful, I guess. But I think there's other commanders that might be a little bit stronger that you can run, and this is just another like really disgusting draw piece you could find in that deck is kind of the thought I had.
Yeah, I don't really get this card. I think it's cool. I agree it's kind of a Griselbrand or Necropotence type effect.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see someone stifle that second ability after someone pumps like 10 mana to, exile 14 cards, and then they go to return them on, you stifle that ability, and they just lose all those cards. Or, the worst is, like, if Asmodeus gets destroyed and you recast him, it's a new object, so those cards that you did last turn aren't there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, it's a fixed Griselbrand. There's the ability here for this to be really powerful. Like, Griselbrand was just accidentally broken. It was kind of tough to screw that up for the most part. This, you do have to play around a lot more. But it's a fun design, I think.
Right.
What's next?
Next is Barrowin of Clan Undur. 2 white and a black for a 3/3 dwarf cleric. When it enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon. And then whenever Barrowin attacks, return up to 1 creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield if you've completed the dungeon. So a Sun Titan type card with a extra hoop to jump through.
Yeah, I mean, this one I think is just not going to see much play. I think you have to jump through too many hoops. You're also in 2 colors, like maybe if it was a mono white, it'll be worth doing to get through that hoop because mono white needs the advantage or something. But I mean, if you really wanted to build a dungeon deck and use this as your commander, there's something that might make sense. But I think this one is there's just too many asks here, I think, for this to really be that useful. And it's also probably not one that goes to 99, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I know that a couple of our listeners have a cleric deck and they are excited for a new cleric, so that's going in the deck. But otherwise, yeah, I totally agree. I don't see it won't lead a deck. I think there's better options to do that dungeon deck, but it's cool.
In the dungeon, to be fair, doesn't really have much opportunity cost. It just sits there in the exile until you use it. So it's not like it takes a card slot up or something and you play this. You just play a dungeon to get a little bit of free value, maybe. So yeah, I mean, in the cleric deck, or some, maybe even a dwarf deck or something where you just don't have that many options. Yeah, it's maybe worth it just to get a little bit of extra value off that dungeon. And dungeon is a fun mechanic. It's just relatively, they kept things very safe with it, I would say.
Yeah.
We've Bruenor Battlehammer next. 2 red-white for a Dwarf Warrior. It's a 5/3, which is pretty good for that cost. Each creature you control gets +2/+0 for each equipment attached to it. And you can spend 0 rather than pay the equip cost of the first equip ability you activate each turn. I mean, there are probably better options for your Boros equipment deck commander, but this would also be just fine if you wanted to run it as your commander. I would guess if you are playing a Boros equipment deck, this almost definitely goes to the 99, just because, it turns your Akiri Lineslinger into something, not that Akiri isn't already really strong, but like it makes it just that much crazier. So I think that's what this is. Like, it's definitely probably not your best first choice for a Boros equipment commander, but it's going to go, I would say, in almost every one of those decks.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's more of a utility card than a leader. It's just a not as good Pure Steel Paladin, but maybe that's without the draw card. That's why I think it's not as good as Pure Steel Paladin. But the fact that this buffs each creature that is equipped, so yeah. I mean, you can do that go wide strategy, and put a sword on every single creature you have, or just make that 1 Voltron creature and 2 more power higher.
Yeah. What is next?
Next is Delina, Wild Mage. It's 3 and a red for a 3/2 Elf Shaman. When it attacks, choose target creature you control and roll a d20. If your result is 1 through 14, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary and it has exile this creature at the end of combat. And then if you roll a 15 through 20, you create one of those tokens and roll again.
That's really good.
Yeah, and I think there is an infinite loop with like Combat Celebrant and like 2 other cards where you can just constantly get infinite combat steps.
Oh, sure. That would make sense. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So there's that kind of path if you want to go with it. The thing is, how these kind of things usually work is you want to proc usually ETB triggers. So, something comes into play, you destroy an equipment or destroy an artifact or make 3 tokens or something.
Right.
And, you're going to accrue value. It kind of is how Alesha tends to work. Although you have 3 colors to play with there, this is only mono red. But what way you choose to go with this, if you want to, kind of do army in the can and make a bunch of tokens, or you want to do value ETB triggers or something, there's probably a lot of options here. And because you're in mono red, you tend to be limited with how abusive you can be with it. But you have a 1 in 4 chance for that token to get a second roll, and conceivably you could create 3 or 4 tokens if you get enough lucky rolls. But a 1 in 4 chance to make a second one is pretty decent.
Yeah, that's huge. The downside is the token is tapped and attacking, so you don't get any triggers, like attack triggers. But hey, I don't mind making 4 Utvara Hellkites,
right,
or if
exactly.
I go on a roll or something like that, I'm down for that.
Yeah, for sure. So we have Drizzt Do'Urden next. I'm sure I said that wrong, and someone's yelling at me for not knowing my Forgotten Realms lore appropriately.
Can we pause quick? For the podcast as myself that cannot pronounce anybody's name correctly, this is the worst set ever.
Right, because usually we're talking about names that don't exist, so like, oh, okay, that could be right, whatever. These ones that are almost all characters from Forgotten Realms, so there is somewhere a pronunciation for them, probably. We just didn't look all of them up. So Drizzt Do'Urden is an Elf Ranger, 3/3 for 5 with double strike. When it enters battlefield, create, Gwenevere, I guess. That's not what it is, but that's kind of what it looks like. A legendary 4/1 green cat creature token with trample. And whenever a creature dies, if it had power greater than Drizzt's power, put a number of +1 counters on Drizzt equal to the difference. And that's not just a +1 counter, it's equal to the difference between the 2 of them. With double strike, this is going to hit hard very quickly. It feels a little bit like a Kresh style creature here. It's going to cap at some point, like a big creature is going to die, and at some point Drizzt's power is going to be so high that it's not going to, or going to be high enough that you're not going to get counters anymore. But it's not a creature an opponent controls either. It's just a creature. So like you can run big beater green creatures in this deck and sacrifice them to a greater good or to a Life's Legacy or something to, turn your to draw a bunch of cards to make your commander go from a 3/3 to a, 8/8 or a 9/9 that now has double strike, and then swing in and just probably one-shot somebody sometimes with commander damage.
Yeah, that sounds a lot of fun. I also think this seems like a trap card to me. Like, I feel like that's going to be the issue. You hit it on the head. Like, at some point, it's going to cap out, and you're going to realize you don't have any creatures in your deck that are higher than Drizzt's power at the time, so what do you do?
Yeah, I think that the way I described that deck, too, there's also a lot of moving pieces in there you're going to be tempted to do. You're going to want to put creatures in there that you can sacrifice that are big, so you need to, like, have enough ramp to get them out, so you can sacrifice them to buff your commander, and then you're going to be tempted to do things like, okay, well, do I want Doubling Season? And those kind of things in here to, make your commander get even more counters on it. But it doesn't have any evasion. So, okay, do I need to put some, trample or flying enablers or things like that in here? And all of a sudden, for this deck to work the way you want, you're looking at 130 cards or something. I think it can work, don't get me wrong, but I think it's going to require a lot of fiddling with pieces to get it to balance the way you want it balanced.
Yeah, 100% agree. Next one on the list is Ebondeath Draco Lich. This is a 2 black for a 5/2 zombie dragon. It has flash, it has flying, and it enters the battlefield tapped. But you may cast it from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebondeath Draco Lich died this turn. I like this card a lot. I think this is a really cool way to, really take advantage of the commander dies rule being changed, last year.
Yeah.
Couple years ago at this point. Jeez, that's a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Dang it, 2020, where did you go? But I think this is just really cool. That 2 toughness is going to make it, you have to figure out how to protect it. You're not going to chump block with this, but
Right.
Having a 5 power creature that, you can cast on your opponent's end step, it comes in and you're ready to swing away on your turn, that's super powerful.
Yeah, and it's always there available from your graveyard. And if you're playing one of those Teysa Envoy of Ghosts deck, or I guess Teysa Orzhov Scion style decks, or even your Regnan Krav deck where you want to constantly be sacrificing stuff, this is just another option there in that kind of deck where, hey, one turn I'm sacrificing a token and going to bring Ebondeath back, the next turn sacrifice Ebondeath to create a token in the case of Teysa, or give you the ability to make tokens in the case of Regnen Krav, and then next turn sacrifice. Like it's something that you can churn in and out of graveyards pretty regularly, even if you're just using it for that ability, let alone it's a 5/2 flyer, which is pretty decent as well.
Mm-hmm. I didn't even think about it for Regnen Krav. Thanks, Dana.
Glad to help. So we have Farida, Devil's Chosen next. The Izzet uncommon, 2 blue-red. It's a Tiefling Warlock, 3/3. And it has an ability, Dark One's Own Luck, that says whenever you roll 1 or more dice, Farida, Devil's Chosen gains Flying and Menace until end of turn. If any of those results was a 10 or higher, you draw a card. I mean, pretty straightforward. This is the equivalent of the coin flip commander that we have gotten a couple of the last few years. This is a dice rolling commander. You just want to jam as many of the cards in blue or red that, instruct you to roll die. And this is your commander that, in addition to whatever those cards do, whether it's something like Delina Wild Mage that we talked about, or any of the non-legendary stuff, once in a while your commander's going to draw you some cards, and it's going to get Flying and Menace to poke through for damage. I mean, that's really what it is. I don't know where you would run it beyond that, but it seems pretty straightforward, and if someone's going to build a deck, and I get it. That seems interesting.
Yeah, you said it. Let's move on. Next one is Grazilax Ithlid Scholar. It's 1 blue for a 3/2 horror. Whenever a creature you control becomes blocked, you may return it to its owner's hand, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. I like this. It's a cool way to have a bounce effect on a creature. So you get to save your fun stuff on your board. If if people do block, it might entice them not to block. And the fact that you're only drawing 1 card off of all your creatures hitting, I think, is not super scary.
Yeah, it's pretty fair, and it probably will work with things like ninja decks or something, or they want to be sneaking damage through sometimes, and hey, something gets blocked, I'm just going to bounce it back and play it again. Maybe a deck where you have a bunch of ETBs on stuff that you intentionally want to bounce those creatures and refund them. Yeah, the fact that it's mono blue kind of limits what it can do in terms of being a commander. I think you're pretty limited to building around it, but yeah, I think it's a fun card. Let's move on to Gretchen Titchwillow, the Simic uncommon, and it's pretty aggressively costed at green and blue for a 0/4. You can spend 2 green-blue and draw a card and put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. That seems like we've seen that before in a gazillion.
My first Tatyova.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Simic commander that, I guess, at least in this case, because it requires green and blue activated ability to do that, it's not a tap ability, it's just an activated ability, so you can use it multiple times. It's probably pretty hard to generate enough infinite mana to just kick off and do this. It's a Simic commander that does the same things they all do. It feels like a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to go in that Simic value deck with Tatyova, with Thrasios, with, all of them. It's just all going to be there, and it's just going to be like, how fast can they make infinite mana and get their lap man out and end the game. So I feel like we both agree on that one.
Yep.
Next is Hama Pashar, Ruin Seeker. It's 1 white-blue for a 2/3 human wizard. This is the uncommon Azorius legend. It says, room abilities of dungeons you own trigger an additional time. I think this is kind of like the dice rolling ones. If you want to do the dungeon thing, have fun, do the dungeon thing. My personal opinion is I think you have to go 5 colors with the dungeon if you want to get everything out of it.
Probably, yeah.
But, I mean, some of these dungeons are kind of cool. I mean, the Dungeon of the Mad Mage has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps through it. Lost Mine of Pandelver has 4 steps, and then the Tomb of Annihilation has 4 steps as well. So, I mean, these do have some cool value in them, but at the same time, it's not my thing. But sure. I definitely can't wait to see a dungeon deck out in the wild.
Well, you talked about Barrowin being something that people that have a cleric deck might want, and yeah, you can play dungeon off to the side, and when you play Barrowin, you get to do dungeon stuff, and if you never play Barrowin, you're not really out anything. This is a case where this card doesn't do anything unless you're playing dungeon stuff.
Right.
So this is just not going to see play unless you're playing a dungeon deck. That's just what it is.
Even being a wizard, it doesn't do anything for other wizards.
There's so many good wizards, right? You're just not going to bump an Archaeomancer or something so you can play this.
Right.
So next we have Icing Deathfrost Tyrant. That is the mono white dragon, and there's a mythic dragon in every color. We discussed Ebon Death earlier. This is the white one. 2 white for a legendary creature dragon. It's a 4/3 with flying and vigilance. When Icing Death Frost Tyrant dies, create Icing Death Frost Tongue, which is a legendary white equipment artifact token with equipped creature gets +2/+0, and whenever equipped creature attacks, tap target creature defending player controls, and it costs equip 2. So it's a, dragon with flying and vigilance that when it dies, it leaves behind a not that amazing piece of equipment, but I mean, it does something at least. It's leaves something behind for you to utilize. My first thought about this was, I feel like this isn't good enough necessarily for an equipment deck, because I just built an Azorius equipment deck, and I'm like, it doesn't feel good enough for me to run in there necessarily. You, Max, who have a flying deck, and sometimes a win condition there as your commander, is this good enough for that deck?
No. Yes. Maybe. 4/3 for 4 is great. That's like Gisela, Blade of the newer Gisela.
Sure.
Vigilance is awesome, but the token it creates, I guess, it's only +2/+0. Yeah, that's 2 more power. I mean, that's awesome. I like the tapping the creature down if that equipment exists, but at the same time, Hexproof is around and Ward is around. I don't know. I think it just comes down to, do I have a better 4 mana creature at 4/3 or better power toughness?
I feel like if the equipment it made was like +4, gave +4/+0 or something, and you're like, oh, that's a significant swing when I come through with that, particularly on a commander.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, go ahead and blow up the board. When I'll play my commander next turn, I'm going to equip this thing, and it's going to turn into a 10 power swinging in. Versus, I feel like then it's much more tempting. I think at +2/+0, it's just not quite enough.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I get it's like the Ice Dragon, so I get why it does that Frostwink's ability, that equipment, but I don't know. I don't think it's going to cut it in most of my decks.
Or even if the equipment, if the equipment gave the same abilities, if the equipment gave flying and vigilance in addition to +2/+0 or something, like the equipment needs to be stronger, I think. But I like this card a lot. I definitely also feel like it's just not a commander. It could go in decks, but I just can't imagine wanting to build this as a mono white deck.
I think after looking at this card and we're discussing it, I think the icing on the cake for me, no pun intended, is the fact that the equipment itself is legendary.
Yes.
So, even if you recur the dragon and it dies, you sacrifice one of the equipments.
Yeah, that's too bad, too. I was, literally thinking the same thing as you said that, Max. Like as a commander, that's where it might get interesting if this was a deck where you built it intentionally to put a bunch of those equipments in play.
Right.
At least that would be kind of weird and fun, and you can't even do that with it, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
All right, what's next?
Next is Inferno of the Star Mounts. This is the red mythic dragon for 4 red. It's a 6/6. It can't be countered. It has flying and haste, and then for a single red, for an activated ability, Inferno of the Sun Mounts gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When its power becomes 20 this way, it deals 20 damage to any target. So if you activate it 14 times, or however many to get it to 20, let's say you slap some equipment or some auras on it, but you're gonna dome something or someone for 20 damage. That's half your life total in Commander.
Yeah.
And the fact that this has haste, it's average costed for dragons. It's 6 mana, whatever. But you could easily drop this, put boots on it, put a couple swords on it, and then all of a sudden you're at 12 power. Well, next turn I have 8 mana open. Boom. You just dome someone for 20 and you hit them for 20.
Yeah, I don't think this is particularly amazing or anything, but I like it. Again, I talked about that with Icing Death. I actually quite like this as well because I like that there's a little mini game there.
Yeah.
I'm going to build this as a commander and I'm going to throw a bunch of equipment in it and I'm going to, be able to play this and all of a sudden equip it and it goes to 10 power and 14 power and 16 power and now I can just spend 4 red mana and I can use, Braid of Fire in this deck and because you can pump it up on your upkeep with that free Braid of Fire mana or whatever. There becomes a lot of weird mini game stuff you can do with this as your commander that I think would be fun even if it isn't crazy strong.
Yeah, I do see though there is going to be that. I feel like this is going to kind of be like an infect. Once you show your trick, you better figure out how to kill the other 2 players in your pod that after you took out player 1,
Right, because the entire deck would have to be built around this commander. And the same thing, once everyone realizes that, we're just going to take your commander out, then you're stuck. You're kind of stuck there. But it's fun. We have Imarith Desert Doom next, the blue dragon, 3 blue. For a 5/5 with flying, and Imarith Desert Doom has Ward 4 as long as it's untapped. And whenever Imarith deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card, and if you have fewer than 3 cards in hand, draw cards equal to that difference. which in blue, usually you're not sub 3 cards in hand very often. So it's usually going to be draw a card. Ward 4 is nice, but it's only when it's untapped, so people can still do stuff mid-attack if they have instant speed options. Or if it's just lying there untapped after you attack, I guess people can still hit it as well. Yeah, this is cool. It's probably going to be an absolute house in limited and maybe even in a standard environment where all those things are really, really useful. Commander, yeah, I'm a little bit less sure where you would run it or what deck really wants it, and I don't know if it's that good of a commander itself either. But again, I like the design.
Yeah, I feel like this is kind of what Dragonlord Ojutai was supposed to be.
Yeah,
because that has
sure.
hexproof when it's untapped, and then when you hit someone, you anticipate, you look at the top 3, put one in your hand, and one on top, one on bottom. I feel like this is like a redo of Dragonlord Ojutai. Yeah, I agree with you. It's cool. I don't see it being on its own unless you can permanently give it vigilance, which equipment again or some
you can do, right?
You can do. There's definitely ways to do it, but yeah, I totally agree. It's pretty rare when in mono blue that you have less than 3 cards in your hand.
Yeah.
So unless you're just doing like a ton of instants, like during combat, to draw 3 cards. That seems like a lot of work.
Yep, agreed. Where are we going next?
Next is Kalain, Reclusive Painter. It's the uncommon Rakdos legend. It's a red and a black for a 1/2 human elf bard. When Kalain enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. More treasures. Everybody loves treasures. And then other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each mana from treasures spent to cast them. I really like this design.
I do too.
Like the fact that it's making you use your treasures. Maybe you're not going to hoard them for Revel in Riches. It's making us be like, okay, use your treasures to cast your creatures to make them stronger. And it's additional. So you spend 4 treasures to cast a 4-mana creature. That's coming in with 4 extra counters on it. So I think it's a really cool design. I like it. I don't know. I don't see myself building it, but I definitely like the design space they're going here with having you benefit from using treasures outside of just, using them for your non-creature spells.
Yeah. I mean, you build this as a treasure deck, basically, or this maybe goes in your existing treasure deck if you are playing one that's, black or red. The uncommons are almost always signpost cards for how to build it limited, and in this case, it just all happened to be legendaries, so that makes them relatively narrow, and that's perfectly fine. At least I guess I like this thing they did here where they made all the signpost stuff into legendary creatures, because if it's just a, regular creature, you can't use it as a commander. In this, you technically could. So like if this was just a human elf bard non-legendary and it was just, called your local painter at the farmer's market or something, It would still function the same way in the draft environment and in limited, but you couldn't use it as a commander. Here you can if you want to go that route, even though a lot of these are not ones I think we'll see a ton. I like the design. I think it's super fun.
Yeah.
The Dimir signpost commander here, uncommon, is also 2 mana, blue and a black. It's Cridle of Baldur's Gate. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses 1 life and mills a card, and you gain a life and scry 1. And whenever you attack, you may pay 2. If you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. So, yeah, it's a rogue. Those are rogue deck colors. It's a way to give a little more evasion in your rogue deck. It's going to let you scry, which is always useful on attack, and gives maybe some other rogues in your deck that don't have evasion for whatever reason you're running them because they're good and lets you get some evasion. Yeah, it's probably not the thing you want at the head of your rogue deck, as long as things like Sig exist that are probably better, but this probably gets a slot in some of those decks for sure.
Yeah, I definitely love it. It's another rogue. Chris and I did a Azera Sands, the Trickster deck tech about a month ago, and I kind of took that more rogue tribal versus the mill. Mm-hmm. This card would slot great into any Azera Sand deck. It slots into humans decks.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that outside of Changelings, this is the first set. Oh, that's a lie. This is almost the first set that had blue elves. Edric is an elf.
Yeah,
I forget
that's true.
that. But there aren't many blue elves, especially blue-black elves. So, this is, if you want to do Dimir elves, you now have a general for it.
That's true. Yeah, good point. All right, what's next?
We have Minsk, Beloved Ranger. It's the mythic Naya commander, red, green, and a white to cast. It's a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, create Boo, a legendary 1/1 red hamster creature token with trample and haste. And then it has an activated ability of X. Until end of turn, target creature you control has base power and toughness XX and becomes a giant in addition to its other types. Activate only as a sorcery. So definitely D&D-ish there, making your companion stronger for combat. I don't like that it's a sorcerer ability. I wish you could do this during combat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, it's a cool take. I find it interesting that Wizards is doing a lot of these when the legend comes in, make a companion. You know, we got that with Kari Zev.
Yep.
You know, back in Aether Revolt, we've gotten a few since then, and now we have, for sure, at least 2 we've talked about in this set alone.
I mean, this feels very Naya. Naya likes making big giant beater creatures. The deck probably isn't going to look that much different than someone's Mael deck already kind of looks, but it gives you one more option. The fact that you're making a hamster is pretty fun. I think this just feels like a fun, stompy kind of Timmy deck, and those are always welcome in the format for sure. We have Nadar, Selfless Paladin next, 2 white for a Dragon Knight. That's a 3/3 with Vigilance. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you venture into the dungeon, and other creatures you control get +1/+1 as long as you've completed a dungeon. We've made this comment a few times. This is just one more. Probably isn't something you want to run outside of your dungeon deck. It's a dragon and a knight, I guess, technically. So maybe we're so low on knights that it's worth running just to have a knight to occasionally proc the dungeon mechanic for fun. But I think this is the kind of thing you want to be doing dungeon stuff specifically to run this, because power-wise, it's just probably not strong enough to get a slot.
For sure. I mean, it definitely goes in the partners with commanders from Battlebond that deal. One cares about knights, one cares about dragons, and this is both.
Good catch, actually. I didn't think of that. That's a good catch.
But even like for mono white decks, a 3-mana 3/3 with Vigilance is awesome.
Sure.
Like, worst case, you know, if you have Odric keyword soup, it just gives Vigilance to everything, and you know what? If it attacks, cool, you just do the dungeon thing. Like we've kind of said, it isn't anything super grindy for the game. It's just another thing you can quickly do and move on with your turn.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, to my favorite card in the entire set, we have Old Gnawbone. This is the green mythic dragon. It's a 7/7 for 5 green. It has flying, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasures.
Oh, this is going to be disgusting in Dromoka.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is, Dana. You are 100% correct. It's going to be disgusting in Reki, too.
I don't know if I'm going to run it in Reki. Not that it will be good, but like...
Too much?
Yeah, because of the way that the deck tends to work, like by the time if I'm playing a 7-drop and it's able to attack, it's probably because I'm going all in which case I won't be able to use the treasures anyway because the game's going to be over.
Right.
Whereas your Dromoka deck's a little more grindy. So I don't think it's going to go in Reki, but the first thing I thought when I saw this was how many treasures we're going to make in that Dromoka deck. It's going to be insane.
Just call me Scrooge McDuck and I'll be happy.
Just swimming backwards in the pool of treasure. Yeah, I mean, it's great. And here's the thing. Yes, it's going to make a crazy amount of mana, but it's green and it's 7 mana, and every green 7-drop is an insane card. It's whether it's Avenger of Zendikar or Greater Hoof Behemoth, or like it's just one more in the long list of green mythics that cost 7 or more mana that are just crazy impactful. Giant Ataphage. Like, Giant Ataphage, if we were doing set reviews back then, we'd been like, this is an insane card. Like, it's just what green does in mythic slots.
For sure. I also noticed this as we're doing our review. Every dragon, these 5 dragons, have the same power equal to their CMC. So I feel like these are like the bosses in D&D, so as, you know, they get harder to fight if this was actually like a campaign.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, up next we have Orcus, Prince of Undeath. And I remember Orcus from at one point in college doing like one D&D module. And I think in the actual commander decks, we added an item called Wand of Orcus. And if I remember right, that was like the end goal of that campaign that you used pre-generated max level characters for, and it was just like a, you know, high level dungeon crawl thing. I do remember Orcus from like one of the few times I have played D&D. So we have Orcus, Prince of Undeath, X, and then a 2 black red for a legendary creature demon. He's a 5/3 with flying and trample. And when Orcus enters the battlefield, choose one. Each other creature gets -X till end of turn, and that's of course the X you spent when you cast it, and you lose X life. Or return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and they gain haste. So that's an ETB ability. However, because of it's an X cost, you can't really blink this or reanimate it to get that ability because X is always going to be 0. So you're giving creatures -0/-0, or you're returning 0 creature cards from your graveyard. So basically, it's even though it's an ETB, it's a non-cast ability realistically.
Yeah, it's cool, but it definitely is one of those commanders that you just have to get back in the zone or get back to your hand somehow to recast.
Yeah, and it's going to be powerful, and if you want to play some kind of a black-red control deck, this is a pretty good way to control the board state, either through wiping it or returning a handful of like Fleshbag Marauder type stuff when you cast this commander to clear the board again, or at least control everyone else's attempt to play. That's where I think it's going to wind up getting used pretty heavily. Although it is a demon, and Rakdos decks do love demons, and they love demons that do this kind of stuff, so it'll probably go in those decks as well. But I would say as a commander, it's going to be kind of some kind of a real Staxy control shell, I would guess.
Probably.
What is next?
Next is Oswald, Fiddlebender. It's a legendary creature gnome artificer. It's a 2/2 for 1 and a white. And it has an ability called Magical Tinkering. Ooh, it's kind of what I do when I brew my EDH decks. For a single white and tap, sacrifice an artifact. Search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to +1 of the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, activate it only as a sorcery. We got Birthing Pod for artifacts,
yes,
folks.
We do.
And this is going to be played in a lot of the 99, and I'm really interested to see it come out as a leader of a deck. Again, it kind of has that Birthing Pod, Yasan issue, though, of you need to know your deck so well to know what you're getting, so you don't spend half an hour looking for that one card.
Well, the power of Yasan winds up being you have things that untap stuff really frequently in green that you can go tutor up, whether it's like Seedborn Muse or whatever. It's like you have things in there that will allow you to reuse Yasan every person's turn. That's way harder in mono white if this is your commander, at least. So it's way less likely to be abused. However, like people will build this as a commander because it's probably an interesting challenge and you'll see some fun stuff with it. But I would say it's going to be way less powerful than Yasan for that and other reasons. Where I'm going to bet we see it a lot is like in a Breya deck or something.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just like, hey, I'm going to run it in there and sacrifice those Breathopters to go get this 1-drop that'll eventually turn into a 2-drop, into a 3-drop. And if it gets killed, he spent 2 mana, who cares? It's like it's such a low investment for something that might have a pretty big upside and is probably interesting and fun too. Yeah, I like the design. It's a safe design. It's not going to get broken super easily, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Staff of Domination will be in a lot of those decks.
Yes, very true. Next we have Sheshra Death's Whisper, a 2 black-green with some pretty great art for a human elf warlock. She's a 1/3 and has an ability called Bewitching Whispers. When Sheshra Death's Whisper enters battlefield, target creature blocks this turn if able, and an ability called Whispers of the Grave. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you can spend 2 life and draw a card. So, when she ETBs, and that counts if you blink her as well somehow, you force opponent's creature to block, and probably swing at them with something with Death Touch or that's giant and green or something, and it's a way to kill that creature, and then you can draw a card by swapping 2 life for it. Again, I like the design a lot. It's an uncommon, so the power levels make sense that it's good and useful and interesting and not busted either because it's an uncommon. Yeah, I like it. You will see it built because it's not crazy narrow like a few of these uncommons are. There are probably better ways to do what this wants to do in those in Golgari colors, but it's a cool card.
Yeah, I keep reading this looking for the word Death Touch, and I don't find it.
That's really too bad.
I feel like that should be on here, because that would be awesome.
Yes, it would. Yeah, that would be, then it would be a super fun commander. And I would, at that point, be like, man, do I want to replace Glissa with this?
For sure, yeah. But I don't know. I agree. I think it's one of the least narrow uncommons, like you said, but it doesn't really spark any interest on my end of the spectrum here.
So what's next here?
Next is Targnar, Demon Fang Gnoll. This is the uncommon Gruul commander. It's a red and a green for a 2/2 Gnoll. It has the ability Pack Tactics. when Targnar attacks, if you attacked with creatures with total power 6 or greater, this combat, attacking creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn, and it has an activated ability for 2, a red, and a green to double Targnar's power and toughness until end of turn. I like this card. This is sweet for an uncommon legend. I think you could do some cool extra combat step stuff, because it's this combat, so if you can loop combat steps, they just keep getting bigger. There's also that really fancy legendary dragon in the precon that's coming out that is super cool, that has to do with making a lot of mana, so I definitely see these two going together. I don't know, I think it'd be a really cool kind of like budget build type of deck if you build Targnar.
That's a good point. When I look at this, the first thing I thought of was I think Stonebrow, Corrosive Heroes in these colors, where creatures with trample get +2/+0. Like, there's way better commanders in these colors to do a thing. There's way better commanders than Targnar to do a thing too. But like, it's perfectly playable, and if you want to build something at kind of a lower power level that in Smash creatures, this is a pretty good way to do it, and it's going to be a cheap card, and you can build probably a pretty good budget deck with this as well, and just stomp some people.
For sure.
Yeah, I like it. The Trask is next. 6 green, 9 mana for a legendary creature dinosaur, and it's a 10/10. The Trask has haste and ward 10 as long as it was cast. So, okay, ward 10, I mean, it's functionally hexproof. Whenever the Trask attacks, it fights target creature defending player controls. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I know the Trask a little bit from lower. I thought it would be something a little bit more than this. I don't know, this feels a little bit underwhelming for being a Trask. If it was just some other creature, it would be a fine card, but I thought it would be a little more than that. But hey, it's Dinosaur too. Dinosaur decks are probably going to love this. Green, yes, you have to cast it to get the haste and ward 10, but it's green. 9 mana and green is 5 mana.
Turn 4.
Yeah, other colors. So also probably not going to get a spot in Recce, just because a lot of the time stuff that's that big comes into play off of like a Kamal's Druidic Vow or something that wouldn't have haste and wouldn't have ward 10, so therefore it's just a 10/10 body, and I won't run it there, but I bet we'll see this in Dinosaur decks for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's cool. I think they kind of used all the awesome stuff for green on Gnawbone versus the Trask.
Sure.
For the mythic being this being a mythic, I think is a little underwhelming, but I like it. I definitely like it. This goes in your big green stompy deck, if you're running Ghalta.
Yeah.
This is just another dino that goes in there, and you're probably going to cast it every time.
Agreed.
Next, we have Tiamat, the dragon god. It's the mythic, it's a 7/7, and it costs 7, 2 and Wooburg. It has flying, and then when Tiamat enters the battlefield, if you cast it, search your library for up to 5 dragon cards not named Tiamat, then have different names, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle. Okay, if I have to, like... This is fun. I don't know if it's, way back in the day I talked about building an Ur-Dragon deck. I don't know, in my opinion, if I like this over the Ur-Dragon, just because that Eminence ability is awesome. And then it lets you draw cards and put something onto the battlefield. This just finds you your 5 best dragons, but you still have to cast them.
Yeah, I would guess your Tiamat deck is going to look very similar to someone's Ur-Dragon deck and vice versa. I would guess if you're playing Ur-Dragon, you're going to want Tiamat in the deck. If you decide to build Tiamat, you're going to want Ur-Dragon in the deck. They're not the same commander at all, but they're probably relatively interchangeable in how you build that deck and their roles in that deck as well. I don't know if one... I would say the Ur-Dragon, like you said, is probably better, but it's not like the Tiamat's still really good. My one complaint, as playable as it is that, I guess, it's not doing anything that's that different from what we already have a commander that does with dragons.
Right. I mean, it is nice. I think this is the one card I actually appreciate that it is on cast and not ETB or anything like that, because if this was an ETB...
Oh, it'd be crazy.
Then it would be better than the Ur-Dragon.
Yes, for sure. Next we have Trelasarra Moondancer, the Selesnya uncommon signpost card. It's just 2 mana to cast, a green and a white for a 2/2 elf cleric. Whenever you gain a life, put a +1 counter on Trelasarra Moondancer and Scry 1. And I think I managed to pronounce that different ways 3 different times over the course of reading that, but here we are. So again, it's a pretty small scale effect. I can't imagine anyone's looking at this going, oh, I really want to build a Selesnya life gain deck that no matter how much life I gain, I just get a single +1 counter. I don't that seems relatively underwhelming as a commander. I'm not even sure it's good enough if you have a Selesnya life gain deck like Tristani or something. Is it good enough for the deck? Maybe, I don't know. It's open-ended, but also feels like a card that probably isn't that exciting outside of that limited environment.
I think I slightly disagree with you here.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think it leads a deck, whether it's elves, clerics, or just green-white life gain. I don't think it's your commander. I think it's just that extra piece of life gain in an elf deck. You already have what's the green elf that gains you a life when anything enters the battlefield? I
mean, there's something like Priest of Titania whenever an elf comes into play, but there's a couple things like that, yeah.
So this is just another one of those, and if you're building elves, you're probably playing Reese the Redeemed.
Sure.
You can pump out tokens. They enter you gain a life. This gets bigger.
Good point.
I kind of look at this as like Citizen Champion in my Tuvasa deck. Getting a +1/+1 counter and drawing a card is way different than scrying one, but at the same time, it's just benefiting me from playing enchantments. I'm just building another threat, where I think if this is just another body in your elf deck or your green-white life gain deck, you're just benefiting it, because it's for each instance. So if you drop 6 creatures, you gain 6 different... You have 6 different triggers of life gain. That's 6 more counters on this thing and 6 scry ones. And I think it's just another cog in the life gain machine.
And I guess I haven't looked. There's probably some old card that says whenever you put a +1 counter on a thing, gain a life or something. Whereas I'm sure there's some terrible infinite combo with this too that someone could run. I haven't looked, but that seems like the kind of thing that would exist too, so who knows. That's a good point. You have changed me slightly. That does make sense. I was thinking in terms of it's 1 counter for every life gain instance, but that's true. There's a lot of situations where you do gain life 6 times in a turn, and that's suddenly 6 counters pretty easily, so that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, just Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant on the battlefield, there's 2 separate triggers for every creature.
Good point.
Which would trigger if those are out and you cast this. So that's awesome.
Good point. All right, what do we have here? We're in the home stretch. We have 4 left.
Woohoo! Varys, Silvery Moon Ranger. It's a human elf ranger. It's a 3/3 for 1 green. It has reach and ward 1. Weird combination there. Whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, venture into the dungeon. This ability triggers only once each turn. And when you complete a dungeon, create a 2/2 wolf creature token. So again, it's another dungeon commander. I definitely think it goes in that 5-color dungeon deck. I also see people probably putting this in like wolf decks, because there are like the 2 Tolsimirs that came out. So, if you're just benefiting from casting a creature, you venture into the dungeon. Like, cool. You don't even really have to... This is probably the one dungeon commander that doesn't require a lot of work.
It does trigger only once each turn, but that's each turn, not on each of your turns. So, you can, if you have ways to, cast creature or planeswalker spells on other people's turns, and green has plenty of ways to do that. You can trigger it multiple times each spin around the board. Yeah, it will go in your dungeon deck, and it's maybe playable as its own commander as well. If you want to build a dungeon deck, it's not going to be crazy powerful, but yeah, this is fine. We have Volo Guide to Monsters next. It's the Simic Rare 2 and Simic 4 total for a 3/2 Human Wizard. Human Wizard part is kind of relevant here because it says whenever you cast a creature spell that does not share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, you copy that spell, which immediately eliminates humans and wizards, humans being the most popular tribe, and wizards being a very common and popular one in blue. So you're not going to get triggers off humans or wizards. This is interesting, at least at first glance. I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, so you want to build a deck that has as few tribal overlaps as possible. I'm going to want to run 1 green cat and 1 blue merfolk and 1, blue zombie and 1 green warlock or something. Like, you're going to try to spread this stuff out and find which ones have probably ETB abilities that you can take advantage of by making the copy when you cast them. However, I feel like you're going to do a ton of work finding the ones you want that don't overlap, and then it's just going to be the same Simic value deck that every other Simic value deck is. It's just going to require a ton more work to build it, I think. But maybe that's fun for you too, so I don't want to sound like I'm dumping on that. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what it winds up being, is just another Simic value commander that's going to require a lot more work to get those triggers, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's going to take a lot of work. But I would like to shout out Jumbo Commander here. He just did a video on this, and it involves your favorite mechanic, Dana. It's about mutate.
Yes, it is.
So I never thought about that, but that is kind of cool since mutate can't target humans.
Right.
You know, you just pick something and mutate a ton of stuff onto it, and then all those other things fall off when the creature dies, and now you have all those triggers, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool thinking.
Yes, DJ does really cool deck things like that, and that's just one more. Yeah, for sure. All right, we have 2 left, Max. What's next?
Next is Xanathar, Guild Kingpin. It's the mythic Dimir legend at 4 blue-black for a 5/6 Beholder. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library anytime. You may play the top card of their library, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast spells this way. I found my Dimir commander.
Nice. Oh, cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Definitely an in-person deck. This is not a virtual EDH deck.
Yes.
But I really like this. I've always liked Gonti, but Gonti's just super popular, like, in our local area.
Yeah.
And with the friends we've met through podcasting, I feel like everybody from at least a show has a Gonti deck. So I like this a lot. You can do a lot of stuff with your upkeep. You know, there's Paradox Haze. It's a triggered ability, so you could copy it. You know, at the beginning of your upkeep, copy that ability, target 2 opponents. So, like, there's ways where you could essentially possibly hit your entire pod and you can just start playing their stuff.
Yeah, I think, so the problem with Sen triplets, at least whenever I've played against a Sen triplets deck, people don't like getting their stuff stolen, and they especially don't like it when it's in their hand, because what happens with Sen triplets decks tends to be someone targets you and they play your land and they cast your spell and play your creature, and then you're down to like 1 card in hand or something.
Yep.
And you're just hosed and can't do anything. And then somebody else removes the Sen triplets because they don't want to have that happen to them next turn. And it goes around the board a couple times, and the Sen triplet player rebuilds and takes a shot at somebody else. And it's frustrating being that person who loses your hand and then can't play Magic for a couple turns. I think this kind of works around that. Yes, you're playing other people's stuff, but you're doing so off the top of their library. You're not emptying their hand out. So once they're done doing that, you can go back to playing your game. I think that's way less frustrating, both like psychologically and frustrating in terms of it's not depleting your resources. It's taking things that you never got a chance to draw for the most part. That's just way less bothersome, I think, for most people, and way less annoying logistically than it is to lose your entire hand.
Yeah, 100% agree. And the fact that you can play the top card, so this is your lands, you know, that is huge. You aren't going to get stuck, be like, oh, everybody has a land at the top of their deck, and I've already played mine, you know. I really like this, and I can't wait to toy around with it, and hopefully I will have it built for later this year.
Fun. Cool. Looking forward to seeing it. Last but not least, we have Zalto Fire Giant Duke, 3 red for a Giant Barbarian. It's a 7/3 with Trample. And whenever Zalto Fire Giant Duke is dealt damage, you venture into the dungeon. So again, a dungeon card as a commander mono red dungeon seems like an archetype I'm not going to see very often at a commander table. And it's one more card that says to me people will probably be trying to build 5-color dungeon decks versus, you know, doing it in 1 or 2 colors. Even though there's a few things that maybe let you do that, I would bet that we're going to see 5-color dungeon decks is what it's going to wind up being, and this will be in that deck. And if I play Commander another 10 years and never once saw this as a standalone Commander deck, I would not be shocked. That's just seems like a thing you won't see that frequently.
Yeah, I'm kind of shocked at how small of a butt this creature has. Like, why is it only 3 toughness when the ability is the fact that it has to be dealt damage? Like,
and when it's dealt damage, you just venture into the dungeon in mono red. That doesn't seem like it's that powerful of an effect for something that's going to die really often.
Right. I wish this was like a 3/7, because then at least you could like bolt it and venture into the dungeon.
Sure.
Or, you know,
and that still would be perfectly fair.
Right, but who knows? We don't design cards, and there's probably a good reason for that.
Yes, and again, maybe this is the kind of thing that got tweaked for Limited, and it just happens to be a legend because they've been doing that, but like it's not really for Commander necessarily, unless you're playing a dedicated 5-color dungeon deck. So
right.
Oh, we got through all of them, Max. Do you believe it?
We did it.
All right. So I think next week we will probably be talking about the actual cards from the Commander set. And then hopefully after that, we'll have 8 to 10 hours where we don't have a new set to review, which will be nice.
Don't jinx us, Dana. Come on.
Well, at least for now, as far as we can tell, we just have the 2 Innistrad sets that are coming, and obviously Commander decks with those as well. But I think we're on the down slope with in terms of like getting one set a month. So that'll be kind of a nice reprieve.
Yes, I cannot wait to not do set reviews.
Okay, well, we will be back next week with Chris back on the show, and we'll take a look at those Commander decks, and we'll just retroactively go back and talk to him a little bit about what he thought about these sets too, because he's our resident D&D player. Until then, I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitter birds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseQuishy1. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. And our show was edited by Rafael Garcia, who you can find on Twitter at Ursa Bearwalker. Until next week, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.